So you've got a podcast and you want to grow by cross-promoting it with other podcasters. That means you recommend another person's podcast to your audience during an episode, and in return, they'll mention your show to theirs. It's a winning strategy. Getting in front of someone else's audience is one of the most effective ways to attract new listeners, and it's usually a win-win for you and the other host. But how do you find podcasts to collaborate with? What's the best way to reach out? And what sort of collaborations are even possible? Raphonic.com is a database containing millions of podcasts designed to save you time finding and pitching potential partners. We have a free trial available so you can give it a go, but even if you don't use Raphonic, you should follow these 5 simple steps to collaborate with other podcasters. Step 1. Search for relevant podcasts. Let's say you have a podcast about yoga. You need to find other shows with a similar audience that are going to be interested in what you have to say. One of the ways to find suitable podcasts is to Google yoga podcasts or open Spotify or Apple Podcasts and search for your keyword and see what comes up. You'll need to check if it's still publishing new episodes by looking at the dates of recent episodes. To find relevant shows with Raphonic, enter yoga into the search bar and hit enter. Then select the filter active to only see shows that have published a new episode in the last 45 days. There are lots of other filters you might want to use to narrow down your search even further. For example, the category. Listener numbers are particularly helpful because you'll want to reach out to shows that have a relatively similar audience to yours. You might also want to use the format filter to find shows that accept guests, but I'll talk about the different types of collaboration a bit later. But why limit yourself to the obvious? Why limit yourself to shows that cover exactly the same topic as you? Let's say your show is The Yoga Show. You can use Raphonic's free graph tool to find other podcasts that share a similar audience. You can see the clusters and connections and then dive deeper, finding collaboration opportunities that you might not have thought about before. For example, The Yoga Show shares an audience with shows about positive mindset, healthy living, and meditation. Step 2. Check the podcast stats to make sure it's worth reaching out to. You want to gauge listener numbers, engagement, social reach, audience gender skew, chart rankings, and maybe other data. If the podcast has a website, take a look to see if it has a guesting page or media kit. It might provide listener numbers, average ratings, or chart rankings. But the chances are that it won't. You could try emailing them to ask, but it's pretty unlikely they're going to give away this information unless you're going to spend hundreds of dollars on sponsoring their show. With Raphonic, it's super easy to check out a podcast stats because it's all in one place. You might have already used the filters for some of these, but if not, you may want to check listener numbers. We already talked about that. Engagement score. You want to get in front of an engaged audience, ideally. Audience location. If your target audience is based in the US, there's no point collaborating with a show with a primarily Australian audience. Social reach. Podcasts tend to repurpose episodes for social media, so it's another way to boost your exposure. Ratings and reviews. See what people are saying about the show. Gender skew. Make sure it matches your target audience. Chart rankings. It's another gauge of popularity. Step 3. Listen to some episodes. You need to make sure that the show is actually a good fit. It may look good on paper, but in reality, you might not gel with it. You can listen by heading to a podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if they have a website, they might have their RSS feed listed on there. You can also listen directly within the Raphonic app. When you're listening, ask yourself these questions. Do you like the style? Does it have excellent audio quality? Does it feel like you'd fit in with the podcast host? Is the podcast relevant to you and your niche? Also, listen for ideas that resonate for you and note down the episode number, as you'll use these later to personalize your outreach email. If the show is a good match, add it to a target list by hitting Add to List. Then create a new list and give it a name. You can then add other shows to this list and keep track of where you are with them. Step 4. Get the contact info and pitch the host. You can search for contacts on Google, or if the podcast has a website, you can use a tool like Hunter to find email addresses. On Raphonic, we have email addresses available for every show, and if you can't see what you're looking for, you can ask our concierge team to find better contacts on your behalf. Next, it's time to draft your pitch. If you're good with words, you can do this yourself. If you're not, you can use one of Riphonic's templates that's specific to cross-promotion. Hosts can smell a generic pitch a mile away, so make sure you don't just copy-paste one after the other. There are 5 things to think about when drafting your pitch. First, show how you can add value to the host. Talk about how they could attract new listeners by working together with you. Second, make sure you personalize each pitch using the notes you made earlier about what you liked about a certain episode and why. Next, get to the point. No one likes to read a bunch of waffle. So once you've drafted your pitch, go back through it and trim it by at least a quarter. Fourth, use a straightforward subject line. You need to grab their attention, but this isn't the time for clever puns or wordplay. Podcast collab followed by a unique angle you're suggesting is probably a good idea. Finally, think about attaching a podcast one-sheet to your email that contains a lot more information about you so the host can get to know you better if they want to. Once you've sent your pitch, if you don't hear back from them in a few days, send a follow-up email. Step 5. Agree on a type of collaboration. There are many different paths you could go down here. When pitching other podcasters, you may have one type of collaboration that you put forward, or you might want to keep it open to see what works best for them. A popular way to work with other hosts is to do shout-outs either on each other's shows or on social media. You may talk about a specific episode that listeners find valuable, or mention a specific social media post that they should go and check out. Ad swaps are when you record an ad and the other host plays it during an ad spot. Either pre-roll, before the show starts, mid-roll, during the episode, or post-roll, immediately after the episode finishes. Guest interviews work particularly well if you're promoting a new course, book, or service. You can be a guest on their show, and then they come and be a guest on yours. Make sure to include a call to action so listeners know what to do after they listen to you. For example, maybe you can get them to download a guide, and then you can ask for their email address. A podcast takeover is when you drop an episode into another show's feed. You could record a new episode specifically for that audience, or you could use one of your existing ones. Either way, the host should introduce the episode, explaining the collaboration and what they're about to hear, to set the audience's expectations. If recording a whole guest interview sounds like a lot of work, you could do a podcast segment feature, which is shorter. You can then get a link to your podcast in the show notes. If you're willing to do the work, you could co-host an episode or mini-series with another podcaster. You'd need to brainstorm ideas and figure out roles to make sure it goes smoothly, but a successful co-hosting collab could bring you a lot of new listeners. Whatever you choose, make sure you have an agreement in place so that everything is clear and things don't get awkward. So you now know how to collaborate with other podcasters and attract new listeners to your show. If you're ready to take the next step and start looking for suitable podcasts to work with, head to Riphonic.com and give Riphonic a try for free. It'll save you tons of time and help you maximize the impact from your appearances. Catch you again soon.